Hello, fourth grade. Has anybody had a self-cut hairdo yet? I cut my bangs, so they're looking really uneven and short, but I'm healthy, so I am fine. All right, so we are up to chapter 20. No sooner did I leave the Mercury than I considered returning and asking that man about the feather. But he had made me feel uncomfortable, and I took him for a bully, what some people called a ring-tailed roarer. Then, making excuses, I told myself there were a million pelican feathers around. It was simpler, easier not to go back. Besides, I was feeling somewhat reassured that bugler, Sam, had seen Jacob in the Mercury last night. I took it to confirm that at least my brother had not signed on, which I had not truly thought possible, with that Panama-bound ship called the Yankee Sword. Not sure what to do next, I thought the only other place worth looking for Jacob was atop Goat Hill, where he often went to watch for Mother's ship's arrival. But heavy rain had recommenced, and I could not imagine him sitting there amidst that soaking. In any case, I decided to go back to the tent in hopes that he had returned. Struggling to stay free of mud, crowds, and scattered rubbish, I hurried uphill toward home, all the while telling myself that to worry was ridiculous. And yet, I did worry. For let it be admitted, it was my growing sense that I had failed my responsibilities toward Jacob, and that made me feel uneasy. It was as if I, in some fashion, had caused his wandering off. I had spent a day away from him and come back from my trip down bay with Thad late. Yet I hastily reminded myself the cause was the broken oar, not me. Still, when something bad happens and you think it might be your fault, it always seems worse. By the time I reached our tent, I had built up hopeful expectations that Jacob would be there. A quick look inside told me he had not returned. Dispirited and troubled anew, I sat on one of our beds. The more I thought about it, the more upset I became. It may have been bothersome to look after Jacob, but it was quite another thing to have him disappear. I reminded myself, in charge of him. Yes, a sibling can be annoying, but there's no one you love more. To ease my tension, I told myself this was just a small mystery, a mystery called, where was Jacob? Did I not like enigmas, the unknown? Was not the sky suitably gray and low? Like a description in a book, it fit the moment. That is to say, I told myself that this would be a modest puzzle. I should embrace it, solve it quickly. Jacob, I said aloud, please come back. I went across to the cafe. Did you find Jacob? Senor Rosales called out as soon as he saw me. Two men dressed like miners were standing at his wood plank counter eating. I shook my head. Have you seen him? No, lo, he visito. I haven't seen him. Can I offer you some food now? Gracias. I stood at the serving counter as he gave me a cup of coffee and a slab of beef. I reached into my money belt. He held up his palm. When you find Jacob. Who's Jacob? One of the men asked who had been eating. In San Francisco, strangers talk to strangers all the time. My younger brother, I said. Where is he at? I don't know. Probably went to the diggings, said the man as he put a pinch of gold grains into Senor Rosales' outstretched hand to pay for his meal. He's too young, I said, but I had not thought of it before. Perhaps he had gone to find father. It was something I could almost see him doing out of frustration, attempting. Never too young to get rich, said the man. I heard tell yesterday of a 9-year-old boy digging alongside his old man up on the San Joaquin River. Pulled up $2,000 nugget. As the miners headed out, one of them paused and looked hard at me. Excuse me, you a boy or a girl? A girl, I said, holding my head up high. Nice to see one, he said, touching his hat to show respect. Not that many around here. He started to leave and hesitated and looked back and said, Married, ma'am? No wish to be, I said, giving the answer I'd learned to use. Hope you didn't mind me asking. said the miner with a shy smile. Then he touched his hat with politeness again and left. Senor Rosales stood behind his counter with his arms folded around his chest. You are distressed, aren't you, Corita? Jacob has never gone like this, I answered. No idea where he would go? He talked of shipping out. Jacob, nunca, never. Or maybe he did go to find father. Senor Rosales shook his head. Not without telling you. At the Mercury, there was a musician, a boy. From what he told me, Jacob had been listening to the music there last night. He must have been there looking for me. Well then, ask that Nino. I did, but he said he had no idea where Jacob went. Perhaps he'll remember something else. People do. I suppose, I admitted. When I finished eating, I went back to our tent and decided to wait until Jacob returned. I took off my hat and smoothed back my hair, feeling how quickly it had become dirty again, telling myself I should buy some soap at Thad's store. I pulled my hair around, braided it anew, and tried to be patient. Perhaps Senor Rosales was right. I should speak to that bugler boy again. Perhaps he had remembered something. Any hint to where Jacob had gone would ease my worry. Then I reminded myself, father was due back in 3 days. What if, by then, I could not find Jacob? That thought gave me a jolt of panic. Ignoring the rain and the mud, I headed back toward the Mercury. Chapter 21. The saloon was much more crowded than before, the noise already full-mouthed. At the entranceway, I looked first for that not-so-nice man, the one with the pelican feather on his coat lapel. Relieved not to see him again, I went to the stage at the back of the hall, hoping the Negro boy was there. When I saw he wasn't, my heart seemed to drop. The only one on the low stage was an old white man sweeping. His full gray beard was unkempt, his bald head, his mouth collapsed, his bleary eyes red. With his ragged clothing, I judged him to be a failed miner. Such men were all over town. Not knowing what else to do, I stood waiting on him, but he paid no attention to me. Instead, he worked his broom in slow, ceaseless circles, now and again pausing to throw out a clogged cough. Sir, I called at last, can you tell me where the musicians are? The old man paused his work and gazed at me as though waking from a dream. Musicians, he asked and coughed. His throat was full. I said, there was a black boy here, a bugler. He told me his name was Samuel, Sam. The old man stared at me, but it was as if he were seeing. Not seeing. He let forth a few more coughs, which shook his whole body. When he stopped coughing, he drew his trembling hand over his mouth and wiped a gob of whatever he had spit up and then smeared it on his trousers. Sir, I prompted, I need to speak to that boy. One of the musicians, the colored kid, don't know much about him, save him and his father live over at Happy Valley. Used to have an older brother. Don't know what happened to him either. He coughed again and then spit and turned away and resumed his slow sweeping. It had hardly been a conversation, but when he turned his back on me, I knew it was over. Thank you, I muttered, and headed for the door, making my way through the unruly gamblers. I again looked for the man I didn't like, but caught no sight of him. Dejected, I passed through the entranceway. But once outside, it was clear that if I wished to speak to the bugler, I would have to go find him in Happy Valley. Happy Valley was a small area south of what people were calling Market Street, situated at the southern end of Yerba Buena Cove, near a place called Rincon Point. No ships came there, not even the abandoned ones. I suppose the name Happy Valley was meant as a jest, because the men with whom I had worked had taken pains to tell me there was no valley and little happiness there, and it was not a place to picnic or sniff the air. Rather, it was an area full of sludge and sewage and gross mud, that if one desired to define the word dreadful or nasty, you might as well describe Happy Valley. Thad had spoken about it too, saying that Happy Valley was the most crowded, poorest part of the city. Crowded, he said, because people could live there without paying rent. Squatters. Most of all, It was the section of the city where the discarded people and things were shunned. The people living there, he said, had had the worst kind of luck, were sick or poor. More often than not, they were a mix of all three. Once you lived there, he said, you tended to remain there as if stuck in the mud. Thad also claimed that people who had committed crimes often took up residence there, since it was a common knowledge that the city's new small police force refused to even venture into that area. In other words, all agreed that Happy Valley was the last place I should visit. But though it might be the worst of San Francisco, if I wanted to speak to the boy Sam, that was where I had to go. So it was not long after I left the Mercury that I stood at the unhappy neighborhood's edge, where I could see for myself much of what had been told. The people I saw walking about appeared forsaken, nary a cheerful face, nor did I see any women or girls. As I remained there, seeking the courage to go forward, I remember Father saying when he left, "Try and act a little ladylike." No, going into Happy Valley was hardly ladylike. It might, I had been warned, even be perilous. Yet Father had also told me that I must be responsible for my brother. I couldn't have it both ways. In any case, my agitation had only grown. I had to find Jacob. Of course, there was nothing to suggest that the bugle boy, if I could ever find him, knew anything more than he already told me. But as Senor Rosales had suggested, Sam might have remembered something after I left. I therefore felt obligated to speak to him, to the last to have seen Jacob, he being the only thread I could clutch to, my tiny clue as to my brother's whereabouts. Except as I stood there before Happy Valley, I didn't even know how to start looking for him. Then I heard a slow, sad weep of music, which drifted over the dilapidated dwellings, clear and clean. I knew it right away. It was the song I had heard the bugle boy play. I often think of writing home. I told myself it had to be Sam. Hoping the music would continue so I could follow it to the source, I reminded myself I must be careful. Excuse me. Sorry. I'm reading kind of late today. Hoping the music would continue so I could follow it to the source, I reminded myself that I must be careful not to get lost. For my money belt, I wiggled out of my knife and kept it hidden in my hands. Only then did I step forward. You might think that trying to trace the source of that music would be easy, but there were no order to the place. Pathways were never straight. The people living there never used anything and everything that might give shelter and set it up in utter random ways. Tents, shacks, lopsided packing box homes, a cloth tied to 2 or 4 poles, sheets of old sailor cloth for making tents, or spread on the ground under which people lay. As I walked, moving along the winding, pinching pathway that lay between tents, shacks, and sleeping spots, the music stopped or became soft, which meant I had to stop and pray it might resume. Each time the music halted, I'd whisper, as if to the boy Samuel, "Keep playing, keep playing." As I continued on, men appeared from what seemed to be nowhere. Seeing me, they stopped, their looks poking at me, their raw gazes rude and rough, sometimes altogether alarming, as if daring me to go forward. At such moments, I felt the need to retreat and find another route. Never had I been so glad I was not in a young woman's dress. I kept wandering, constantly checking behind me in hopes I'd remember my way out. I was not sure I could. Fortunately, the music repeated itself over and over. Oh, how sad it sounded, yet oddly, it gave me hope. At length, the music guided me to a tent made of blue cloth, square and somewhat larger than ours. It was wedged between other tents, so there was not so much space around it. With my knife concealed in my hand, I stood and listened to the music. Though relieved I'd found where I thought the boy Samuel lived, I dithered, reminding myself that he might not know anything more about Jacob, nor had he been friendly. I had no idea what he, a colored boy, might think of me, a white girl. He might resent my coming. I further admit, by then I saw I was already wondering how I was ever going to find my way out of Happy Valley. Telling myself I'd come this far, that I had to at least try to speak to the boy, I put my knife away, stood before the tent open, and called, Samuel Nichols, Samuel, Sam. Instantly, the music stopped. I think we have to keep reading. Chapter 22. There was no reply to my call. Hello, I tried again. Is Samuel there? May I speak to him, please? It's me, Victoria Blaisdell, Tori. There was still no response. I stepped back, trying to think what I should do. He won't come, I told myself. He doesn't want to speak to me. I was about to leave when someone poked his head out of the tent. It wasn't Sam, but an older Negro man with touches of white in his hair. His dark, wrinkled face made me think he was old enough to be the boy's grandfather. His look was solemn, suggesting he was not pleased to see me. For a moment, he studied me as if trying to read me. Then he said, What do you want, miss? Please, sir, I'm looking for a boy named Samuel, I said, wishing to be as polite as I could. Why? He demanded. I'm trying to find my brother. He disappeared. Alarm filled the man's face. Are you saying that Samuel had something to do with your brother going missing? Oh, no, sir. I'm just looking for help finding him. What's Samuel got to do with it? He's the last person I know to have seen him. The man continued to consider me with distrustful eyes. Where, he said. Where was that? Last night at the Mercury. Was he gambling? Oh, no, sir. He's only 10 years old. 10? What was he doing at the Mercury at night? I think he was looking for me. Were you there? His tone was severe. I was fishing down bay with a friend, only I got stuck there. When I finally got back, my brother was gone. I don't know where. I've been looking for him. What's your brother's name? Jacob. I spoke to Samuel this morning. He told me he saw Jacob last night, listening to him play at the Mercury. I'm Samuel's father, Mr. Nichols. How do you know Sam lived here? An old man at the Mercury told me, and when I got here, I heard Sam playing that song. I often think of writing home. I followed it. How old are you? 14, sir. Where are your parents? My father's at the diggings. My mother hasn't come out yet. You are telling me you and your brother are here in this city alone? Yes, sir. And you said your name is Victoria? Yes, sir. A girl, right? I nodded. Mr. Nichols frowned, and his eyes never stopped appraising me. I need to get this right. You and your brother are in San Francisco alone. Now he's missing, but you're not blaming Samuel? Oh, no, sir. I just need help finding him. As if trying to make up his mind, Samuel's father continued looking at me. At last, he said, All right, you can step in for a minute. With one hand, he held the tent flap wide. With the other hand, he made a beckoning gesture. It was not a welcome gesture, but it was permission. I hesitated for half a second, and then I said, Thank you, sir, and went in. The dim tent was neater than Jacob and I kept ours. 3 beds were laid out side by side. 2 boxes stood in the back area. Sitting on one of the beds was Sam, the key bugle on his lap. When he glanced up at me, his face showed not the slightest recognition. All the same, I was sure he must have recognized me and heard the whole conversation. Do you know this girl? His father asked him. His eyes were severe, but I thought protective. Sam considered me for a brief moment. This morning, he said to his father, not to me. When I was practicing at the Mercury, she was asking me about her brother being there. I think Jacob was looking for me, I interjected. Still speaking to his father, Sam said, I told her I don't know anything about him. Did he tell you that? Mr. Nichols demanded of me. Yes, sir. Then what else do you want? There was displeasure in his voice. Please, sir, I said, speaking fast because I was nervous. I was hoping Samuel might have remembered something that could help me. I have to find my brother. And another thing, Jacob had a pelican feather in his hat. Our father gave it to him before he went to the mines. When I was in the Mercury this morning, after I spoke to you, I nodded to Sam. A young man demanded to know what I was doing there, and when I told him, he said Jacob hadn't been in the Mercury and told me to leave. But the thing is, he had a feather on his coat, a pelican feather, just like Jacob had. As I spoke, Mr. Nichols' face was filled with unease. What man was that? Tall, narrow face, long nose. trimmed beard, black cravat, high hat. Samuel and Jacob exchanged looks of alarm. Their silent exchange made me think they knew the person I was talking about. Even so, Mr. Nichols said, "We know nothing about that man." I waited for them to say more. When they didn't, though, I was disappointed. There was nothing for me to do but say, "Thank you," and start to leave. "Hold on," called Mr. Nichols. I stopped. "What's your name again?" "Victoria, sir. Victoria Blaisdell. You can call me Tori." "Okay, Miss Tori. Can you find your way out of here? It can be a fuddle." I hope I can." Mr. Nichols made a gesture to Samuel. "You better show her the way out." Sam looked at his father with, I thought, a question in his eyes. I think I saw his father give a tiny shake of his head. A no. Oh, sorry, tiny shake of his head. A no. I had no idea what that meant. Regardless, Sam put his bugle down on the bed, stood up, and said to me, "Come on." I went out of the tent first. Sam followed, and I kept thinking, what did that no mean? Interesting. So the father was, we'll see. That's going to definitely come back up. So we'll see if Sam can be any help. I'm starting to get nervous about Jacob. Okay, I'll read again soon. Good night.